All right, the mantle is dusted off, and USC has placed its record-setting 8th Heisman Trophy in its place. Got Matt Zemek here, as always, from Trojans Wire, who makes this show roll each and every Monday night with all of you fine folks. Please leave those comments and questions in the live chat, and we will get to them. Consider contributing here at the Voice of College Football and our USC live show. Matt, how you doing tonight?
Doing well, and great to celebrate an 8th Heisman Trophy, and that goes to Reggie Bush. Was officially vacated, stripped, and of course at USC we don't go for that. But the other larger point is, stripping and vacating awards. Just it's the dumbest thing, right? Because like UMass and John Calipari had a vacated Final Four. Like, okay, so like Georgetown didn't win that 1996 East Regional Final in Atlanta. UMass did. Like, you can't unring that bell. And so when we talk about punishments in sports, like a lot of USC fans are Los Angeles Dodger fans, so Trojan fans can certainly relate to the Dodgers losing to the cheating Houston Astros in the 2017 World Series. You can't really declare the Dodgers the champions. I mean, the Astros celebrated in a Game 7 at Dodger Stadium. Again, you can't unring that bell. You can't put the genie back in the bottle. So like a meaningful punishment of the cheating Houston Astros, just suspend Jose Altuve 2 years. Okay, now that would be a punishment. That would have real effect, but you can't strip or vacate things. And so it's not really a USC talking point, even though obviously USC fans think that Reggie Bush should have his Heisman back. It's just a larger point about stripping and vacating. Just dumb and pointless because, one team had a celebration on that big night, or one player had a celebration on Heisman night in 2005. Vince Young didn't. Now you could say that on the merits, maybe Vince Young should have won the 2005 Heisman, but like Reggie Bush had his moment. You can't say, oh, it doesn't actually count. That's just dumb. So anyway, kudos to Chris Fowler for saying on the air, on the ESPN broadcast, that it was the 8th Heisman Trophy winner because, again, Reggie Bush heard his name called. That's forever. You can't take it away from him. You shouldn't try to. And Vince Young got his revenge at the Rose Bowl. So like he got his statement and he made use of the Heisman snub, turned it into emotional fuel. But we're going to claim our 8 Heismans here. Thank you very much. And so just a lot of amazing facts about USC and Caleb Williams and Lincoln Riley in the wake of this. So let's trot out the fact sheet here at the Voice of College Football. So Lincoln Riley has coached 3 Heisman winners. He isn't even 40 years old. USC is the only school with 2 coaches of 3 Heisman winners, Pete Carroll and Lincoln Riley. Only school that can claim 2 coaches of 3 winners. Notre Dame's Frank Leahy and Alabama's Nick Saban are the only 2 coaches that have coached 4 Heisman winners. Lincoln Riley, in the 153-year history of college football, only the second guy to coach Heisman winners at 2 different schools. Tommy Prothro coached Terry Baker of Oregon State in 1962, and he coached Gary Beeben at UCLA in 1967. So Lincoln Riley, just the second man to coach Heisman winners at 2 different schools. And USC now has 4 coaches who have coached multiple Heisman winners, with at least one of them being at USC. Now, Lincoln Riley already had coached multiple Heisman winners, but now he's a USC coach of a USC Heisman winner who has, with multiple Heisman winners, to his credit. So Pete Carroll, Lincoln Riley, John McKay, John Robinson, they've all coached multiple Heisman winners. So USC with 4 coaches of multiple Heisman winners, including at least one USC player. No other school can make that claim. So just a lot of amazing facts about USC's place in the history of the Heisman Trophy, in the history of college football, adding to the legacy, adding to the stature in year 1. So a really good final note for USC at the end of the regular season. Obviously didn't get the college football playoff, and Caleb Williams, in a very funny, endearing, and authentic moment, he said, hey, to his other 3 Heisman finalists, well, hey, you have the playoff, I don't. So, like I'm a part of him certainly wishes that, he was in the playoff too. But Caleb Williams does get the Heisman Trophy, and it's good also that, he did win the Heisman because, all right, this award doesn't always go to the perceived best player on a college football playoff team. It can go to someone who's outside the playoff ropes. And interestingly enough, Caleb's selection means that this is the first non-college football playoff Heisman Trophy selection since Lamar Jackson of Louisville in 2016. Lincoln Riley's two previous quarterbacks, Baker in 2017, Kyler in 2018, they were both playoff quarterbacks in those respective seasons. Joe Burrow, of course, won the national title. Devontae Smith of Alabama won the national title. Bryce Young made the national championship game last year. So this is the first non-playoff Heisman winner since Lamar. And actually, those are the only two non-playoff Heisman winners in the playoff era. It was Marcus Mariota was a playoff quarterback, and Derrick Henry in 2015, he was a playoff running back for the 2015 Alabama Crimson Tide. So a lot of amazing facts pouring in, and they all magnify USC and Caleb Williams and Lincoln Riley.
All right, Matt, I'm going to push back a little bit and probably not make a lot of USC fans real happy, because I think this is a little bit more complicated. So I would love if we could just say steroids in baseball. We can decide X, Y, and Z. That's that. That's what it is. NCAA violations hindered and changed these results. We can do that and punish the right people. But obviously the innocent have to be punished with the guilty, or no one gets punished. All right. So yes, Reggie Bush played that season, and in the estimation and evaluation of college football experts, many of which are not voting on the Heisman Trophy, and many people who should not be voting on the Heisman Trophy actually get a vote, but that's another topic. He played the best season, and I was firmly on board at the time as him being the best player in the nation and awarded the Heisman Trophy. However, this would be the one instance in which you could just simply say, give me that Heisman Trophy, we'll take it back, because you in fact cheated and your program cheated to make you eligible. And I don't remember all the instances, whether that involved grades, money. I know there was an apartment off campus. There was all this sorts of thing. As opposed to what you're talking about with John Calipari and the UMass basketball team and others, for as awful beyond description as the Jerry Sandusky situation was, that was a non-football incident. That did not involve, cheating to gain advantage by either paying players or fixing grades to be a better football team. That's an atrocity against humanity. That is a legal matter in which penalizing the university and a bunch of innocent players who won football games to take their wins away from them. Now that's, to me, asinine and inappropriate. This is simply, Reggie Bush, we're taking your Heisman away from you. Doesn't affect the win-loss record of anybody. Doesn't affect championships. Doesn't affect anything else.
In terms of the contours and the structure of your argument, it's entirely fair and reasonable. I would point out that, Paul D's witch hunt of USC has really, in the course of time, been revealed to be just that, a witch hunt. That Paul D did not color within the lines. And
okay, if I could cut in real quick, Matt, yes, I'm making the assumption that the judgment against Reggie Bush was fair and just. If it wasn't, then of course.
Sure. And that's why I said structurally your argument's entirely reasonable, that it's within the parameters of competition. You're violating rules of competition, and so you deserve anything that comes your way, in terms of that. But I would also say that, again, like USC got hit in terms of, the sanctions in the early 2010s. And so, whether that was fair or not, at least it's focused on, kneecapping the program and what it can do in the future. I'm making the specific point about stripping and vacating. If you're going to punish somebody, punish them going ahead. So you can't make money in the future. You can't unmake the money that USC made in 2004, 2005 with all the dollars rolling in, the full, not yet 91,400 in the Coliseum. So all the ticket sales, but you can kneecap a program in the future. whether fair or not, like you should just punishment should be forward looking as opposed to saying, well, that thing 4.5, 5 years ago didn't count. That's really the main thing. But again, structurally, your argument's entirely reasonable.
How important is this to USC? How important is this to College Football Nation? An award that, even though I don't always agree with the individual that is selected, and I'm on record as saying I would have voted for Caleb Williams, so not in this particular year do I have an issue with the winner. And I do believe it to be the most prestigious award. I think you even made the comment last week that unless you're a diehard fan of the NFL or Major League Baseball, as I have been in the past and knew every MVP award winner throughout the years in Major League Baseball, for example, most people, even hardened sports fans, don't remember those MVPs to the extent that they remember Heisman Trophy winners. So to me, it is the most prestigious team award in America.
I mean, there's no question that you get a special status, special cachet when you are a Heisman winner. And let's be honest, for the non-USC fans who are watching here at the Voice of College Football, I'm gonna admit it. Like, the Heisman Trophy voting is a joke. Like Hendon Hooker not being a finalist, and we've seen, and this is again, like I really like the fact that Caleb Williams won despite missing the playoff, because the Heisman really in the recent years has devolved into really the best quarterback on a college football playoff team. I mean, that's why Bryce Young won. And Bryce Young is a really, really good quarterback, and he did a lot of really good things last year. But Aiden Hutchinson was a better college football player, the pass rusher for Michigan last season. And, you know, I think Bryce Young got in because of that Alabama name, and we've seen Nick Saban with 4 different Heisman Trophy winning players, and it's part of this inclination to reward just the perceived best player on either a college football playoff team, or in Alabama's case, the team most likely to win the college football playoff. So like the Heisman voting, I think a lot of voters need to be stripped of their voting privileges. And also, I'm on record as saying that, we should be inviting more players, not fewer, to the Heisman Trophy ceremony. I think we should be giving more players from different backgrounds their moment in the sun being recognized. I mean, like, inviting only 4 players, like, I don't get it. Why are you narrowing your celebration of the regular season you just had in college football? Why aren't you inviting a defensive player? Why aren't you inviting a lineman? To remind us that college great players are not just quarterbacks and receivers. Why aren't you inviting a group of 5 player? Someone toiling in the salt mines of the smaller conferences. Why aren't you always having at least one of those players? And just more broadly, like Hendon Hooker and Michael Penix, could also say Blake Corum of Michigan. Not having those 3 guys at your Heisman ceremony, recognizing them as part of the best players in college football, like this desire to just limit it to 4, as though that achieves some kind of purpose, as though like ESPN has only enough time to profile 4 players. Get out of here. Like, you should be inviting more players and showcasing the regional conference diversity, the positional diversity, the vantage point diversity with group of 5. Like, you should even consider inviting an FCS player to have a moment in the sun. Like, college football is so diverse, with over 125 schools, and you're insisting on just 4 players. And of course, all due respect to Stetson Bennett, this goes back to the Heisman voting process. And Stetson Bennett, look, he's on the verge of winning back-to-back national titles. And, whether he makes it in the NFL or not, like, he's going to have a very nice career for himself. Maybe like Buck Bellew, he'll be on Atlanta's sports radio station. Maybe he'll sell, real estate, or insurance and make a killing at it. Like, he has his life set up really nicely. So, like, he's living a great life, and it's wonderful. Like, it's great to see human beings thriving. But he is not the 4th best player in college football. Like, it's not even close. It's laughable. And so we're celebrating Caleb Williams' Heisman Trophy, and we should here at Trojans Wire and within the USC family. But like, that's not going to make me, clam up and say, oh, the Heisman process is great. The voting process works. No, the Heisman voting and the processes in and around the Heisman Trophy have really declined over time. And it's a shame to see. It used to be, and this is part of what I've been writing about at Trojans Wire in terms of, studying the history of the Heisman and looking at the award a little more closely than I ordinarily would, because I don't pay too much attention to this award in most years. But with Caleb Williams, I did need to pay more attention to it. One of the things I found in my research, Barry Sanders won the Heisman in 1988 with Oklahoma State. And first off, Oklahoma State didn't even sniff anything in terms of, the national championship, elite bowl game that year, went to the Holiday Bowl, played Wyoming. So the Heisman was not under the grip of, it has to be someone who's playing for the national championship. So the Heisman voting process was good back then. But in terms of a larger historical overview of the Heisman, when Barry Sanders won in 1988, that marked the 54th Heisman Trophy. Guess how many quarterbacks won the Heisman in the first 54 years? 18.
Okay.
18 out of 54. So you can do the quick math. That's 1/3. So 2/3 of the first 54 Heismans were non-quarterbacks. Now, of course, a lot of this was, and again, this is something I wrote about at Trojans Wire over the weekend. A lot of this was the fact that, through the early 80s, college football was a running backs game. And USC had 4 Heisman running backs in a 17-season span from 1965, Mike Garrett, through Marcus Allen in 1981. So to a certain extent, this was part of the evolution of the sport, and just the fact that running backs were the gravitational center of the sport. But nevertheless, now you look at the modern times, you look at the 21st century, 19 of the last 23 Heisman winners are quarterbacks. And, are we really sure that in over nearly a quarter of a century, the best player in college football just happens to be a quarterback? Are we really doing that? And so you point to Jason White over Larry Fitzgerald in 2003. That was an important Heisman vote in the sense that it really seemed to cement the quarterback centric bias of the award emerging. You could find some other examples as well. So the Heisman voting trajectory and the way the Heisman voting has devolved into a largely quarterback centric award, that's one of the worrisome aspects of it. But I mean, this year, I don't think you can say it's necessarily part of that dynamic. I think with Stetson Bennett, yes, but I think with having Caleb Williams first, Max Duggan second, I think that's the proper top 2. And I think I personally would have had Hendon Hooker third instead of CJ Stroud. But so there are larger worrisome trends about the way Heisman voting has gone. But I would also say that Caleb Williams is not problematic in any way or to any extent. He really put his 2 hands on the award, much as Carson Palmer did 20 years ago with a big game in prime time against Notre Dame in a spotlight setting. So Caleb Williams is not reflective of the Heisman's problems. But again, I'm not going to just clam up and suddenly pretend that because a USC player won, that the Heisman voting and Heisman process are pure as the driven snow.
So I'm going to extend on 2 points that you made, Matt. One concerning, and you outlined your invitation process as you just did, but we're a little bit more elaborate with it the last time we talked, and I just think that's brilliant in regards to highlighting more players, highlighting more levels of players with the group of 5 included, possibly the FCS and other players' positions and so forth. So, and let's understand, we're in 2022 now, and watching the Heisman ceremony today, and I'm saying this as an old guy, I can imagine as a 22-year-old or 16-year-old watching this, as I did when I was 16, was different. I didn't have the internet or 87,000 options of entertainment, and it drags a little bit. Does it drag for me? Not really, but if it was faster paced, I wouldn't mind it. But again, for the Gen Xers and even beyond that, the millennials and so forth, I could only imagine if you included those 10 and you made the interview process a little quicker and the hype videos and everything included, the show would move faster and be more inviting. Plus, you would be inviting those fan bases to watch the show.
That's right.
The Tennessee fan base, the Michigan fan base, et cetera, would be watching the Heisman Trophy ceremony.
And that is such a great point. And it really, like, this is really a Heisman show more than a bowl preview show. Like, this is the day of the year, at least certainly for our USC show here at the Voice of College Bowl, to talk about the Heisman because Caleb Williams just won it. There'll be time to talk about the bowl game and the bowl season next week. But there is a tie-in to the bowl games and to college football's postseason problem. And, you and I have talked about this in the past on this show. And that is that when you had the old 1980s bowl system, one of the things that old bowl system did before the BCS, before the playoff, it involved more fan bases on New Year's Day, right? 1983 is the example I keep coming back to. You had Georgia and Texas over there in the Cotton Bowl in Dallas. You had Miami and Nebraska in the Orange Bowl in Miami, and you had Illinois at number 4 over there in the Rose Bowl in the Arroyo Seco against UCLA. And then down in New Orleans, you had number 3 Auburn, number 8 Michigan in the Sugar Bowl. And so by having all those different bowl games, instead of a bracketed tournament or a limited system, such as what the BCS had, you get all these showcase bowl games. And each of those teams that I mentioned, except for UCLA being the outsider, the spoiler against Illinois in the Rose Bowl, all those other teams, they went into that day thinking, well, if the dominoes fall just exactly right, and we maximize our result, we might be able to finish number 1. We might be able to win the national championship, or maybe we finish number 1 in the AP and number 2 in the UPI, and we get a split. So you involved more fan bases on New Year's Day by having that old bowl system, because you would have more than 4 schools in several seasons. You'd have more than 4 schools all with a chance. And so in the playoff, you are limited it to only 4 schools. So the connection, obviously, as you brought up, you have 10 players at the Heisman ceremony. You're bringing in 6 more fan bases than the 4 fan bases that you currently have. So you would think that ESPN, the stakeholders, the people associated with the event would say, hey, let's have more people across the country watching our show. Like, imagine Grayson McCall of Coastal Carolina being the group of 5 showcase players. So you have the state of South Carolina would be watching your show. And then if you have, Michigan with Corum, and also, the other, the outstanding linemen that Michigan's had in recent years. Now, obviously Hutchinson was there last year, but Michigan had award-winning linemen this year. So like the state of Michigan would then be watching your show. And then, of course, if you just have more at-larges, you have 6 at-larges instead of 4, you have Seattle viewers who would be watching Michael Penix. And then you bring in the state of Tennessee if you have Hendon Hooker there. So it really is lunacy why you wouldn't want to have 6 more cities or states, 6 more large communities all huddled around the television watching their favorite player honored at the Heisman ceremony. It just absolutely blows my mind why this isn't happening.
On the subject of Stetson Bennett, so I was contacted on the call-in show because I had stated that Stetson Bennett did not belong as one of the invites to the ceremony. And Georgia caller, I wouldn't say he was irate because he was not, but he was adamant that Stetson Bennett was one of the best players in the country, if not the best player in the country. And I got to say that once I got him past his lifetime achievement qualifications and tried to focus this guy on, it's 2022. I don't believe in lifetime achievement awards. It is a 2022 award. And even if a quarterback was 0-12 or had never completed a pass in his life or was the worst quarterback in the nation in 2021, is completely inconsequential. It's all about what did you do in 2022. So he did bring to light that Stetson Bennett did play his best football in 2022 in the most meaningful games. He was near perfect against Oregon in the opener, 368, 25 for 31, 2 touchdowns. Then I would say the next big game that they played, he played really well against Tennessee, 257, 2 touchdowns, no picks. And then the SEC championship game, he was stellar, 23 to 29, 274, 4 touchdowns, no picks. Just that he played well in their biggest games. So I thought he had a pretty good point there. I would also argue that he's supported by a great offensive line, running game, and the best defense in America.
Yeah, and so, like he certainly did what he needed to do, but he also had that 16-6 game against Kentucky and that 26-22 game against Missouri, in which neither he nor Georgia's offense looked particularly good. And so, there were a lot of ordinary games on the slate. And for Caleb Williams, just as a point of comparison, like Caleb Williams had the clunker against Oregon State. He was below average against Oregon State. That was a bad game for Caleb Williams, but that's it. Like he was decent against Washington State. Wasn't great, but he was decent. Like he was okay. And then the rest of the season, he was turning around these highlight reel plays. And so, in terms of like a 13 game body of work, which, that's what the Heisman's supposed to be, just like ranking teams every week in college football. It is a 13 game body of work. It's not just, you muddle around and you get by and you're barely good enough to win. And then, a few big games in November, you play them well. And, that's your Heisman moment. Make him the Heisman. Like that kind of recency bias, that late season bias, and that championship bias that we've talked about, like being on a college football playoff team. It's not what the Heisman's supposed to be. It's where you be the best player in the year. Not just on a couple days, but over the course of a year. And so Caleb Williams, let's remember, against Stanford week 2. And hey, I know Stanford's not a particularly good team, but just to prove the point that back in early September, Caleb Williams was dazzling. And he was still dazzling in the middle of the season, and he was still dazzling at the end of the season. Against Stanford, USC didn't have a single third down on any of its first 5 possessions, scored touchdowns on all 5 possessions. And so, like, this was a journey that went from the beginning to the end. Excellence the whole way, except for that one game in Corvallis. And Stetson Bennett certainly had several Saturdays this season in which he didn't come remotely close to matching that kind of standard. So again, Stetson Bennett, great year, great career. He has his life really set up for him, but like, it's not even close in terms of, where he stands in the larger picture of college football. Like if you think that Stetson Bennett was a better player this year than Hendon Hooker and Michael Penix, turn in your football analyst card, please. Turn in your card. We won't fine you, but you have to give up your card and you have to go home and walk through the snow to your home, and you need to have some hot chocolate and get a good night's rest. Because like there's just no comparison. Hendon Hooker took a dormant Tennessee program, lifted it from the ashes, been toiling in mediocrity for a very long time, and finally lifted that program to the next level. Michael Penix takes, this Jimmy Lake, John Donovan disaster at Washington, and with Kalen DeBoer's help, turns the Huskies in 1 year into a 10-2 team. Like those guys were absolutely transformative of their programs, while Stetson Bennett, he fits the mold of a Ken Dorsey. Stetson Bennett is like the modern Ken Dorsey 20 years later, a good, solid, competent quarterback, but who had an NFL combine surrounding him, offense and defense, strong physical line play, the way Dorsey had at Miami, is just able to spread the ball around. He doesn't have to make extraordinary plays. Once in a while, he'll make an extraordinary play, but he doesn't have to do that much. And like Bennett played a great first half against Tennessee, as you noted, but like he didn't have to do anything in the second half. Georgia's defense just kept the Vols on lockdown, and Georgia was basically handing the ball off in the second half. And that kind of thing should go into a Heisman measurement that, in terms of how great a player you are. Part of the equation is how much you are asked to do, how much you have to be responsible for your team winning. And so Stetson Bennett just had to be a solid floor general, a solid field general, I should say. Just doing the things he absolutely had to do. Caleb Williams, he was Atlas. He was carrying USC on his shoulders the whole season. Hendon Hooker, Michael Penix basically had the same level and scope of responsibility at Tennessee and Washington, respectively. So that gets into a larger discussion of, what marks the best player in college football. In terms of Max Duggan of TCU, he had to shoulder the burden for the TCU offense, but the TCU defense made a lot of very timely plays. Think of the Baylor game when it was 28-20. TCU had to get the late game stop against Baylor to give Duggan the ball back with a chance to win the game. So, like, when you compare USC and TCU specifically, you will find more moments over the course of 13 games where the TCU defense did more to help out Max Duggan than the USC defense did to help out Caleb Williams. Now the USC defense did save Caleb Williams' bacon against Oregon State. There's no doubt. But in terms of a 13-game collective, there's no doubt that TCU's defense supported Max Duggan more than USC's defense supported Caleb Williams. So it amplifies that, what Caleb Williams did, he was doing it with a comparatively less margin for error, and that should go into our evaluation of the very best player in college football.
So in addition to the support that you would expect in a USC show in the chat, most of the ire is coming from Big Ten and SEC country.
Shocker. Totally shocked. Can't believe it. Wow. Stunner.
And in particular, of course, it's coming in a number of different ways and directions, but one of the main ones seemed to be comparing the defenses that a Stetson Bennett or a CJ Stroud face versus what Caleb Williams faced this year.
Well, CJ Stroud did not exactly light up a bad Northwestern team. And, now people will say,
that was a rough weather game.
Well, I was just about to say rough weather game, but hey, if you are an elite quarterback, like what are we supposed to do with that? All right, just call it an aberration. I mean, and we look at Notre Dame as a common opponent for USC, or a common opponent for USC and Ohio State. I mean, Caleb Williams did better than CJ Stroud did. Now, you could say that in week one, maybe Caleb Williams doesn't play nearly as well as he did at the end of the season. But we could also say that in week one, USC would have had a fully healthy offensive line. And it certainly did not against Notre Dame. And, the Andrew Voorhees injury certainly affected what Caleb Williams was able to do against Utah and Las Vegas in the Pac-12 championship game. So, like, we could play all day with hypotheticals and what ifs, but, Caleb Williams was pretty clearly better than CJ Stroud was against a common opponent, Notre Dame, with a good defense. So, like, I don't see an especially difficult comparison between Caleb Williams and CJ Stroud. And again, I would put Hendon Hooker well above CJ Stroud in terms of the caliber of season he had, and not just for beating Alabama and LSU, but also because, and this is not CJ Stroud's fault, but Big Ten wasn't all that good this year. I mean, you had Ohio State and Michigan, the clear best team, and Ohio State the clear second best team. Penn State was third, and it'll be interesting to see what Penn State does against Utah in the Rose Bowl to kind of litigate just how good Penn State really is. But over the course of the regular season, I mean, and like, I'm not making the rules up, I'm not making up facts, but this was a rough ride in the Big Ten. Purdue winning the Big Ten West with 4 losses. It wasn't the Big Ten's best year. Michigan State, collapsing after the one really good year under Mel Tucker. So that program's, facing a lot of questions. I mean, it just wasn't a good year for the Big Ten. And, if Big Ten fans can't admit that, I can't help them. But, like, that's just the plain reality. Wisconsin took a tumble. Iowa took a tumble. But, both of those programs regressed. And maybe, Luke Fickell, I would say he's going to get Wisconsin back to that 10-win standard that Paul Chryst had going for several years. But it didn't happen in 2022. So if we're going to evaluate CJ Stroud against the Big Ten as a whole, Like, I don't think there's a whole lot of upside that you can assign to his collection of performances this season. And again, part of that is outside of his control, but it's an inevitable part of the measurement. Now, you can say that Caleb Williams went up against weak sauce, weak T defenses in the Pac-12, but like, he smoked them. Like, he did what he was supposed to do. And also, I would also say this for the Big Ten fans and maybe some SEC fans who think that Caleb Williams is getting too much credit and CJ Stroud is not getting enough credit. Did you think that USC was going to make the Pac-12 championship game and win 11 games? All right. If you thought that USC was going to make the Pac-12 championship game instead of Utah and Oregon, and if you thought USC was actually going to win double-digit games this season, all right, fine. I will concede that point. But I have the sneaking suspicion that at the beginning of the year, you probably thought USC was going to lose 3 or 4 games because of how bad the defense was likely to be. And Caleb Williams overcame the limitations and weaknesses of that Alex Grinch USC defense, certainly throughout the second half of the season. So it's really just a more matter of, okay, if you are a Big Ten or SEC-based skeptic of Caleb Williams, just as long as you thought that USC was going to do really, really great before the season, then you're being consistent, then you're being fair. But if you were a USC skeptic before the season, and like, I have no way of knowing what you out there, in Columbus or Ann Arbor or Athens or Knoxville, I have no way of knowing what you're thinking. But if you were a USC skeptic before the season and you're trying now to say that, oh, Caleb Williams was going up against weak Pac-12 defenses, can't have it both ways. You were either a skeptic before the season, or you can't be a skeptic now. If you were consistently, if you thought before the season that USC was going to reach this standard, then you have more of a right to say that, I always predicted that USC's offense was going to dominate. And that's how you can devalue Caleb Williams, just if you want to carry forth your argument consistently. But if you were a skeptic on Labor Day weekend, you can't come at me saying like, oh, well, Caleb Williams was playing against the weak Pac-12. Well, he was against the weak Pac-12, then you should have been predicting that USC was going to win 11 games. But, oh, you were only predicting 9 or 8 wins? Get out of here. Don't want to hear that.
I think Matt and myself both take great pride in being as unbiased as possible. Being unbiased is impossible in my estimation. Everyone has biases, of course, and those biases aren't just about rooting interest. You have a bias about anything, even if you don't have a rooting interest. You can watch this Patriots-Cardinals game tonight and have absolutely no rooting interest, but just based on what your experience is, what your approach to analyzing a game is, you're going to have built-in biases. However, we do our extreme best to lift those out of the conversation and out of the mindset and the approach as possible. So I'll say it this way. I posted a video this week with my conference rankings, and I believe I still, regardless of what we saw over the past 12 games of play for all these teams, I believe that the Big Ten is a better conference than the Pac-12. However, the results are not telling me that. Therefore, I ranked the Pac-12 above the Big Ten as a conference because I believe that the results have been better. However, I'm going to flip the argument back over to say I think it's pretty inconclusive at this point. I'll be interested to see postseason results, which of course we'll have to take into a certain context because of opt-outs and so forth. But the entirety of the season, obviously, the story is yet to be written completely in ranking and rating these conferences. And of course, the Big Ten is going to have 2 major games that is going to spell success or otherwise for the Big Ten. I will leave the conversation with this one fact. The Big Ten is 5-6 against Power 5 opponents, and the Pac-12 is 5-8. Now that doesn't tell the whole story in any such way, but I will say, Matt, that when we start looking at narratives and how each league looked this year and what the perception is, and the perception is that the Big Ten is down this year. Once the leagues play only conference games, they can only go 500. That's the conclusion of of league play. And so then if you take that next metric and say the Pac-12 went 5-8 and the Big Ten went 5-6, and again, I don't think that's conclusive in any such way. I think maybe the Big Ten suffers from, if you take Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State, they went undefeated against the rest of the conference between those three schools. So that's, I believe, 22-0. So you're going to weight everyone else down.
Oh yeah, I mean it's gonna like change the balance of win-loss distribution, and you could say that in the Pac-12, like the top 5-6 teams, so many lots of 9-win teams.
Yes.
In the Pac-12 this season, they very finely distributed their wins and losses so that they all took on a little bit of water, but not too much. So yeah, and so you could make the statement that, like, let's take Oregon State, pretty good example. Like Oregon State going 9-3 in this season, that's probably not a great verdict on the Pac-12. Like if you wanted to just zero in and focus on the Beavers, without a quarterback, somehow managing to win 9 games this season, yeah, you could say, what, that doesn't really reflect all that well on the Pac-12. Other teams should have been able to get them. Like, why wasn't Washington State better? And why weren't other teams in the middle tier of the conference able to get the Beavers, who were essentially playing without a quarterback for most of the season? But then you also have, UCLA with DTR and Oregon with Bo Nix, and it's really hard to poke holes in the Pac-12 when you look at those teams in terms of, they were setting a very high standard for a good portion of the season. It was really hard to get at UCLA's offense. It was really hard to get at Washington's offense. Like those offenses to me would be playing really well under just about any set of circumstances. But I think Oregon State is really the test case. And it's too bad that Florida has 10 trillion players leaving, because I was really looking forward to Oregon State versus Florida in bowl season. That would have been such a great test case. Going up the 9-win Pac-12 team against the 6-6 SEC team, who's really better? And I don't think it was for certain at all if Florida had its full or close to a full complement of players. So really disappointing that we don't get that true bowl game test case that we all love in terms of measuring conference superiority.
Because that's what I looked forward to, other than just the enjoyment of watching the games and the entertainment of watching the games, was sizing up the conferences based on the results. And now there's more of a disclaimer than ever when doing so. As Matt had mentioned earlier in the show, we're going to take a deep dive, because we have 2 more shows prior to the Cotton Bowl to take a deeper dive into the matchup against Tulane. But I thought since we do have roughly 20 minutes left in the show, we can take a quick hit from our guy Steve Helwick on SB Nation. Joins us from Underdog Dynasty and Hustle Belt. Steve, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing pretty well. Just watched my Cardinals get crushed by the Patriots on Monday Night Football, but other than that, it's been a pretty good night.
Hey, the Spurs beat the Cavs.
Yes, we did. That was a thrilling ending, but at least one of my teams got a win, and now I'm looking forward to this bowl week. And I think there's a ton of good matchups this Saturday. I'm looking forward to 6-game slate.
Yeah, it's a really good look at the beginning of bowl season, which typically kicks off on this Saturday, but we actually have a couple games coming up on Friday. So, Steve, we wanted to get a quick look and introductory look at the Green Wave. And, of course, we had you on live from the American Conference Championship game with Tulane winning over UCF. Just give USC fans a primer on Tulane football here in 2022.
Well, the first thing that you need to know about this game, and I tweeted this out in the middle of the Tulane USC game, is you got to tackle Tyjae Spears. Tulane has one of the best tackle breaking running backs in college football. There's Bijan Robinson, who's supreme number 1 break tackle running back. Then you have your Dwayne McBride at UAB and Carson Steele at Ball State. I don't know how much you've watched of those guys, but they're supreme tackle breakers. And then there's Tyjae Spears. He's the AAC Offensive Player of the Year, and he's just got better as the competition has increased at the end of the season. Spears rides a 7-game streak of 120-yard rushing games, and he had 202 yards against UCF in the AAC title game. Week before that, had over 180 to clinch that AAC title game against Cincinnati. So Tyjae Spears has really taken control of this Tulane offense, and he's just somebody who can break tackles and really churns his legs and keeps him going throughout. So tackling Tyjae Spears is going to be your number one priority. But also Tulane against UCF showed something really interesting, and that's a dynamic passing attack, which wasn't really present in Tulane's offense all year. Their quarterback, Michael Pratt, had the game of his life against UCF with 394 yards and 4 passing touchdowns. And I think 3 of those passing touchdowns were over 40 yards. So Tulane was really showing explosive playmaking in that game. So I think this one could possibly get into shootout potential. Reminds me of the 2019 Cotton Bowl between Memphis and Penn State.
Yes.
Where Memphis had Penn State early up. They were up 17-7 in that early going, and then it just turned into teams trading punches offensively. Final score of 53-39 in there. AAC has not had a New Year's Six Bowl win since 2017, UCF's famous win over Auburn. So they made it every year since then, and they've really competed other than Cincinnati against Alabama last year. Although I'd say that the game felt closer than the score. Alabama kind of beat them slowly rather than jackhammering them out of the gate. But the AAC, they've been competitive, but they haven't been winning these New Year's Six Bowl games recently.
Tell me about the chess match between Willie Fritz and Alex Grinch. How do you think Willie Fritz is going to attack USC's defense, and what do you think Alex Grinch needs to do to, just do damage control and limit just how many points Tulane's able to put up in Arlington?
It's going to start with a lot of Tyjae Spears, I think. I was really impressed with Tulane's scripted drives early on in that UCF game. That first drive, they got the ball, I think, on their own 15. They just funneled down the field just by about chunk plays of 5 to 15 yards every single play, throwing to the outsides, throwing short hitch routes, taking what the defense gives them rather than trying to go for the explosive plays. And then by making one guy miss, that's how the explosive plays come for Tulane. It wasn't like Tulane was just chucking up 40-yard bombs every single play. It was more they were finding guys in man coverage and just trying to get one guy to miss, and then they were going to the house. So I think that Tulane's going to try to operate with a lot of Tyjae Spears, just basic inside zone plays, off tackle runs, and then try to hit some of its receivers on the outsides or get them on a slant and man coverage and see if they can make explosive plays from there.
All right. Now, one thing to note for the USC fans watching here at the Voice of College Football is that Tulane and UCF played twice. And UCF won the first game, but Tulane got the rematch. So take us through the adjustments that Tulane made in the rematch based on, flowing from the first game and what UCF was able to do well. So when Lincoln Riley and Alex Grinch, I'm sure they're going to look at the second game, of course. It's the most recent Tulane game, and it's a game in which Tulane played well. So they're certainly going to show that film to their USC players saying, whoa, this is how good Tulane can be on offense. But I'm sure they're also going to look at that first game to show, hey, this is how you contain Tulane. This is, you can do things to bottle up this offense a little bit. So take us through a comparison of the two games and the adjustments that were made, but also the good things that UCF was able to do defensively to contain Tulane in the first meeting.
Well, in that first game, it was a lot of UCF's rushing offense gashing Tulane's run defense. UCF had over 200 team rushing yards in the first half, and a lot of it was John Rice Plumlee, their running quarterback, who had a severe hamstring injury in the second game, was pulled for, I'd say, the majority of the contest, and just had to return to the game because the true freshman backup clearly was not ready for that stage. And UCF's offense was going 3 and out every single time with a true freshman. So they brought Plumlee back in the game. UCF had a mini comeback in the conference championship, got it down to 3 points in the fourth quarter. Then Tulane pulled ahead and won. I'd say some of the differences were the ways Tulane attacked the trenches, especially on defense. With a nicked up quarterback who's not able to run as much, of course, you're going to get more sacks, but it just felt like they were able to shed UCF's blocks a lot better in the second game. In the first game, UCF was doing a really good job of pass protection and run protection against Tulane's defensive line. But I thought Tulane really solved that with their schemes in the second game. And their defensive end, Darius Hodges, was touching on that in the press conference. He was saying how well the defensive line coach prepared their adjustments, gave different fits against the run, and also better pass rushing techniques, and they were able to get 6 sacks and 9 tackles for loss in that second game after getting just 0 sacks and 4 tackles for loss in the first matchup. So winning the trenches was one of the key adjustments that Tulane made in order to win the AAC after losing in that first game. And they really stepped up their run defense in the second game. I thought they were better at halting the running backs, but I think a lot of that was also attributable to UCF playing a backup quarterback for a lot of the game. So that kept the Knights offense a little one-dimensional. They weren't able to throw with the backup quarterback in the game. So Tulane could just key on the run there because they weren't going to throw anything more than 10 yards down the field with him because it didn't really look capable at the time. So that's one of the things that you could notice from game to game. But I also thought that just Tulane just did a better job of attacking the Knights on the boundaries and finding UCF defenders in one-on-one coverage and just burning them and winning individual matchups. So that's one adjustment that they made the latter game.
All right, let's flip it to the other side of the ball. So USC is going to be missing a couple of important offensive linemen, but both due to injury and also the NFL draft. So does Tulane have the personnel up front to bottle up USC's running game the way Utah was able to? We have Larry Pilgrim here, our Utah analyst, and he's made the point that Utah had to go into its backups on the defensive line. Fillinger, Ellis, two of its best defensive linemen were not available in the Pac-12 championship game, but the backups were able to do the job against USC's banged up offensive line. So Utah's defensive backups were better than USC's offensive backups. In terms of Tulane's personnel up front, is that defensive line stout enough to take advantage of the USC offensive line deficits that we're going to see in the Cotton Bowl?
It's not even close to Utah's defensive line, I would say. And the biggest difference, I think, is in the defensive tackles. The Utah's nose guards, like Junior Tafuna, like those guys, they have size. They're good at plugging up those run gaps in the middle. And I just don't know if Tulane has the firepower and the depth to provide what Utah did, especially in the middle of the offensive line. So I think Darius Hodges, he's really good around the edges. He's a good pass rusher. He has some good pass rush moves. But I do think that USC's offensive line, I think that they could impose their will on Tulane, and they could pick up a lot of running yards in this game, I would say. The strength of Tulane's defense lies in the linebackers and the safeties. And that's where Dorian Williams and Nick Anderson, two star linebackers that have been with the program for a while, line up. And then the safeties are really good, I would say, at stopping the run. They're guys, and they're good at stopping short pass plays. They're hard hitters up there. But I just don't know if they're going to be able to shed some of these blocks from USC. USC had a fantastic offense all season long. We saw them go shootout for shootout against UCLA. We saw it against Utah in the first matchup that they had in Salt Lake City. And this team can score points, and a lot of it was the foundation up front. Now, I don't know if Tulane's going to be able to penetrate that and really make an impact there, which is why I said earlier that if USC's tackling isn't fixed, I could see this one going into shootout form like that Penn State-Memphis game in 2019.
Very simple follow-up to that larger question of the matchup between Tulane's front four and USC's offensive line. So what's the approach for Tulane in this game? Do you try to blitz, stack the tackle box, load up, be really aggressive in terms of having guys near the line of scrimmage, or do you play the sit back game? Have 7 guys in coverage and you just try and make sure that USC's receivers can't beat you over the top, and you allow for that death by 1,000 cuts with Austin Jones. You allow the 5-6 yards of carry. That means you're not giving up 45-yard chunk plays. Or do you think you have to take away that running game and so that Tulane's offense can be on the field longer? So like maybe if you put everybody near the line of scrimmage, okay, you might give up a few home runs, but that also means that your defense is not on the field for as long a period of time, and you just entrust this game to your offense and you try to win this game 49-42. Which do you think is the better approach for Tulane in this game?
I like the theory of trying to make USC beat you death by paper cuts, dropping 7-8 on a play, because USC has so much talent in the wide receiver room and they run super deep there that I'm a little concerned with Tulane's corners or nickelbacks about containing those guys. But I do look at the AAC championship game and say this team is best when they're aggressive and they're trying to stop the run, and they're trying to limit teams there. I mean, they beat Kansas State with some of the most aggressive defensive play calling that I've seen all year. Kansas State, I think, went 1 for 5 on fourth downs that game, and most of those were fourth and shorts. So this Tulane team was very aggressive on some of those plays where, if you don't stop him at the line of scrimmage on some of those fourth and shorts, he's to the house. And I think that's how Tulane operates best, is going aggressive, especially in those short yardage situations. So, but theoretically, just against USC's wide receiver core, you don't want them to get those explosive plays on you. So it's an interesting debate, and I think that Tulane could try to experiment with both in the early going and see which way they prefer later on in the game. But I really think that's an intriguing style matchup in this game.
All right, Steve Helwick, SB Nation's Underdog Dynasty and Hustle Belt. Steve does a tremendous job, and please follow him on Twitter. You see his handle there. He loves the NBA. Of course, college football, he's got it nailed there as well. Steve, we appreciate you stopping by. Is there anything in particular that you would like us to highlight in regards to your recent work?
Not anything specific. I'm hitting up, I believe, 4 bowl games this season. Frisco Bowl on Saturday, North Texas, Boise State. That could be a good one. Then there's Armed Forces Bowl, Baylor, Air Force the following week. Cheez It Bowl in Orlando, Florida State, Oklahoma. It's a nice helmet matchup. And Florida State's been really underrated team late in the season. Seminoles have been rolling through opponents ever since 3 close losses early in the season. And then the final game would be the Cotton Bowl, Tulane, USC. I've done 2 Cotton Bowls before. I did the Wisconsin, Western Michigan one, and then the Penn State, Memphis one. I think this is another intriguing matchup, and I think it's cool that I started the season covering USC week 1. I ended the season covering Tulane in the AAC championship game, and now those 2 teams come together for a bowl game. So I think that's a perfect way to wrap up my 2022.
And we thank you for helping us from day 1 until the bowl game.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Steve. We'll be knocking on your door again. You can be sure of that.
Yeah, you guys have a good one.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Steve.
All right. Good stuff from Steve Helwick, covering a number of bowl games as he just went through. Matt, before we wrap it up tonight, I just wanted to hit on, not in any extensive way, but just to set the stage for the next couple of weeks. Of course, in 9 days, we've got National Signing Day on the 21st. USC currently has 19 hard commits, 14th ranked, and certainly, again, we will review recruiting and so forth. Don't need to do it here in terms of any individual pursuits, but what is your take on how the class is shaping up and how you expect it to land?
Well, I'm not like a recruiting expert and insider, but I would say that, like, if there is a priority for USC, and like if the Trojans want to get something really significant from this recruiting class, I know enough to realize that USC has struggled to recruit 5-star offensive linemen. Like, that has been the big drought going back to the Clay Helton years. And so, like, USC really needs to land a 5-star offensive lineman in this cycle, because that really would say, hey, we are raising the bar, we're improving our standards. That is certainly something that USC needs to walk away with, by the time we get to February. USC needs a 5-star lineman on the recruiting trail. But on a larger level, you look at what Lincoln Riley and Alex Grinch were able to do in the transfer portal, and like, that's such a game changer in college football. And it was a game changer for USC. And so, it does take a little bit of the centrality away from recruiting specifically, because if you can find, the big reminder about the portal is that you're not taking a raw prospect, who is a blank slate and just is unproven at the collegiate level. No, you can get quality veteran guys, like a Bobby Haskins. Like, USC is not in a New Year's Six bowl. USC does not make the Pac-12 championship game without Bobby Haskins. That was an absolutely essential pickup in the portal, in addition, of course, to Caleb and Jordan Addison and Travis Dye. But like, the USC really needed Bobby Haskins to make this whole thing work when Cortland Ford got injured. And other guys were also banged up, and Josh Henson had to mix and match and shuffle guys along the offensive line. Bobby Haskins was holding down the fort at a level that Mason Murphy and Gino Quinones were not able to do. and we're not going to be able to do. So, the portal is still, a prime focus. Like that's where USC can get game ready players like an Eric Gentry, like Shane Lee, and the defense, as bad as it would have been even worse if Gentry wasn't there in the first half of the season, and if Shane Lee wasn't making big plays against UCLA and Notre Dame. So like the portal is still a big focus, but in terms of recruiting, it's getting that 5-star offensive lineman so that what if, when will this happen? USC needs to knock down that particular question, settle the score so that the fan base and people in and around the program no longer have to wonder when that's going to happen. So like that to me is if there's one thing that USC needs on the recruiting trail, it's that, because you have the skill position players. Lincoln Riley really doesn't need to worry about that particular part of the operation, but it's getting that elite offensive lineman and really elite lineman, period. Like if it's a 5-star defensive lineman, that'll really work too, given that Tuli Tuipulotu was often by himself, and we saw Utah's offensive line handle USC's front four in Vegas. Like USC just needs to get a whole lot tougher. And so just on a broader level, it's all about recruiting on the line of scrimmage, recruiting up front. That's where USC needs the most reinforcements by far. I mean, we saw really the toughness deficit come into play when USC went up against Utah. We saw the rugged identity and the hammer-like physicality of the Utes, and that was really the kryptonite for this USC team in 2022. So like that is the message. Like Utah hopefully sent USC a very helpful message about where this program needs to go in 2023.
All right, folks, we deliver USC football conversation with all of you each and every Monday night, 8 Pacific time. So make it on back next Monday, but also bring some friends with you. So that would be phenomenal if you would get on social media, let people know that we're here with Matt every Monday night. Text, do whatever you need to do. Let's extend the audience here at the Voice of College Football. Get on over to Trojans Wire. Matt, what do you have in store for us in the coming days?
We're going to follow transfers and recruiting, any stories that develop, but it's going to be kind of a quiet week. And, we're going to get our Cotton Bowl coverage revved up, after Christmas Day, that full week leading up to the game. Just one thing else I want to highlight, a story that we did write at Trojans Wire over the weekend. I, tweeted that we're going to talk about it, so I better talk about it before we close up shop here. And that is just the connection between USC and TCU. It goes beyond the fact that Caleb Williams and Max Duggan were 1 versus 2 or 1 and 2 in the Heisman voting. TCU has the first Heisman Trophy winning quarterback, Davey O'Brien in 1938. USC now has the most recent Heisman quarterback. So you have bookends there, kind of like Steve Helwick bookending our season with day one and the bowl game. He covered Rice and now he's covering Tulane for us against USC. But so you have bookend Heisman quarterbacks dating back to 1938. And you also have the fact that the Riley brothers coached the top 2 Heisman vote getters. Garrett Riley, of course, coaching Max Duggan. So that was a really special photo. My favorite photo from the Heisman weekend was seeing Caleb and Max in the middle, the Riley brothers and their wives, all with the Heisman Trophy. Really special moment for the Riley family, as well as for both USC and TCU having the top 2 vote getters. And the other thing is, one of USC's 2 trips to the Cotton Bowl, not the most recent one against Ohio State, but the one in 1995, happened against Texas Tech. And who was coaching Texas Tech? The father of Sonny Dykes, Spike Dykes. Yeah. So there are lots of connections between USC and TCU. It's just fascinating to see all these historical intersections as USC goes back to Dallas for the Cotton Bowl, and as USC and TCU have the oldest and the most recent Heisman quarterbacks, with brothers coaching the top 2 vote getters. Just a lot of puzzle pieces of history coming together here at the Voice of College Football.
I recall Keyshawn Johnson having a field day against the Texas Tech defense in quite a rout at the Cotton Bowl, which I believe was the last of the Southwest Conference Cotton Bowls, as the Big 12 was formed the next year with the departures of the Southwest Conference to the Big 12, most of them, and then scattered across the map elsewhere. And even though it was played on New Year's Day, you could see the hierarchy and the status of the Cotton Bowl at that point in history crumbling as a marginal Texas Tech team was representing the old Southwest Conference on that day.
Yeah, it was the last hurrah because I believe Texas played Virginia Tech in the Sugar Bowl in 1995 as conference champion. So yeah, like that was the last time that the Southwest Conference champion played in the Cotton Bowl. Sad day, but it also is a reminder of the Cotton Bowl's great heritage, which in the final week of December, we're going to talk about that. And that's part of USC's mission in this game, just to offer that note. We're going to repeat it in the coming weeks here at the Voice of College Football. But like the Cotton Bowl is, it's not the granddaddy, that's the roast, but the Cotton Bowl is like your daddy, let's say. Like it is one of the father figure bowl games, and your dad deserves respect, and we're going to treat the Cotton Bowl with a lot of respect.
Yes, a lot of great memories at the Cotton Bowl throughout my life, and I believe, my first Cotton Bowl may have been that famous Joe Montana
chicken soup.
Chicken soup, and down 34-10 and rallying against the Houston Cougars in a icy Cotton Bowl in 1979. Yeah, great stuff.
My first was Freddie Akers beating Bear Bryant in 1982.
81.
That was a very tough game. 14-12, I believe it was.
Yeah, 81.
Well, 81 season, 82 New Year's.
Yep.
Yes.
14-12. Yeah.
Yeah, and I missed Frank Gleber, the excellent CBS commentator. You know, he was such a good football voice. You know, he died way too soon. Remember him and loved his work on those early 1980s CBS broadcasts.
Yes. And I believe Lindsey Nelson was the first voice.
Lindsey Nelson as well. Yes.
That I heard doing Cotton Bowl games.
I was only 2 years old, but he did the 1978 Cotton Bowl when Notre Dame and Texas went at it with the national championship on the line.
Absolutely. Great testimony to Matt's work here from Troy. I admit it, not a USC fan, but I come to listen to Matt talk football.
Thank you, Troy. And hey, we are men of Troy. So, thank you for the compliment. I really appreciate it.
All right, folks. Once again, just don't enjoy the show yourselves, but help us out and bring some folks with you next Monday at 8 Pacific time. In the meantime, get on over to Trojans Wire and check out Matt's work right there. Matt, we don't have a show without you, so we appreciate you making this happen each and every Monday.
Hey, thanks to everybody for coming along. I mean, I know that's like a Heisman week and there's kind of a lull between games. So like you are the loyalists, you are the diehards who make this work here at the Voice of College Football. Thank you so much.